Back in August of 2024, all of the rules regarding real estate commissions changed to a certain extent. And even though it's been several months since that has happened, there's been a ton of videos published and there's been a lot of reporting in the media about this, there is still a great deal of confusion. And I'll admit, it's not just confusion amongst potential buyers and sellers. There is also confusion amongst different brokerages because everyone is handling it slightly different. But over the past few months, a couple of the most common questions I have been getting from sellers has been, does this mean that we no longer have to pay the buyer's agent? Is buyer's agent commission done away with now? And from a buyer's perspective, it's been, so since this changed, does this mean if I want to use an agent, that I now have to pay them directly myself out of pocket? And honestly, the answers might surprise you. So in this video, I'm going to break it all down for you. I'm going to tell you what's actually changed, what hasn't, and what it all means for you in practical terms and in what I'm seeing every single day so that you can get a better gauge and idea of what's actually going on in the market. So let's dive into it and clear up the confusion. Hi, this is Andrew with the Andrew Smith team, eXp Realty here in Frisco, Texas. And first of all, let's start this video out by talking about what exactly changed and the essence of what was behind the lawsuit. So boiling everything down, what basically happened is the terms of the settlement were that there can no longer be a unilateral offer of compensation. So what in the world does that mean? So let's go back and look at how things were in the past. As a seller, you're planning on selling your home, you meet with a listing agent, and a commission amount would be decided upon. A commission amount would be agreed upon. And that amount, whatever it was then split between brokers. Part of it was going to the listing brokerage representing you, the seller, and part of it was being made out, or being offered out, I should say, as an offer of compensation for the brokerage that brings in the buyer. That is no longer allowed. There can no longer be offers of compensation made in the multiple listing service. And the idea behind that is it was felt that it was unfair to sellers and it was unfair to buyers because there wasn't a whole lot of transparency on the buy side on potentially what they were making or what was being offered. Were agents intentionally only taking buyers to properties that were offering a higher fee, for instance? So it wanted to take all of that away, which I'll be honest with you is a good thing. That brings transparency back into it. So everything's on the table. So in essence, what they did was uncouple commissions. The buyer is responsible for negotiating their fee with their agent, should they use to use one, and the seller is responsible for negotiating their listing fee with their agent representing them in the sale. That, in essence, is what changed. Okay, that is what is and isn't allowed anymore. So how does this actually play out in terms of a buyer and a seller? What should you expect? So that's what I'm going to get into right here for you. So let's start with the seller side. So first and foremost, on the seller side, it doesn't mean that you no longer will be asked to contribute or pay a buyer's agent commission. It just means that you're no longer required to offer it, and it's now a strategic decision, not an automatic one. So what exactly does that mean? Well, we've all been there. I mean, you may have a home that's listed for $500,000 and you're offering a percentage out and the offer comes in low, right? It's lower than what you want. And then there's these fees involved. You're looking at all of this. All of that is out the window, right? Or it should be out the window. As I said, there's confusion amongst brokerages still on this as well. But it is very likely and very possible that the buyer is going to ask you for a closing cost credit to cover all or part of their fee that they're paying the buyer's agent. So the commission to the buyer's agent. But it's not a fixed amount. It's going to be negotiated through the actual offer. So if you get a really good, strong offer and they're asking for a concession to cover that fee, that could still work. That could be something that you choose to do. Also, from the seller's side, it's also important to understand that for certain buyers, it is possible that you will reduce the buyer pool if in fact you just unilaterally say, no, I'm not offering anything out. Why is that? Well, there's many buyers that can afford the monthly payment on a house, but they're cash strapped. They have enough money for a down payment, but they don't have enough money for a down payment and all of the fees that typically go along with it. And if it's a buyer that is in that situation and you're not willing to consider a concession towards covering their closing costs and or their agent fees, then that buyer financially simply might not be able to move forward with the purchase of your home. But again, it is now 100% negotiable, offer by offer. All right, so hopefully that clears it up a little bit from the seller perspective. All right, now for buyers, what changed with buyers? Well, there's more changes on the buyer side than there was on the listing side. On the listing side, there's really not any changes except the discussion that a listing agent and the seller is going to have with regards to whether or not they're going to consider covering part of buyer agent fees. The bigger changes are on the buyer side, and more than the commission one is the one that says a buyer representation agreement must be signed prior to that agent showing you any property. And I'll admit, I don't like it. I don't like that change. I don't think it's a fair change. I don't think it achieves a necessary goal. Let's face it, buying a house is expensive, right? And it's the biggest financial investment the vast majority of people ever make in their life. And now an agent that you've spent 30 seconds or a minute speaking to on the phone, you want them to go and show you a house, and now you've got to sign an agreement, commit to them, and commit to paying them a fee if it's not going to get covered by the seller. Doesn't seem right, doesn't seem fair, and I agree. But that's the law. That's what the law actually says. Now, in order to stay true to the law and also be fair to buyers, a lot of different companies do different things to accommodate this. You are not going to be locked into, or you shouldn't be locked into, or you should never agree to be locked into a long-term agreement with an agent you don't know. You don't know anything about them. You don't know if they're any good. You don't know if you get along with them. And then you're going to agree to let them help you with this? No, what you can do is there are ways where you can sign an extremely short-term showing agreement, in essence. It could be for one day. It could be for one property. It could be for one weekend. It's fully customizable and it expires quickly, and you can revoke it if you determine that you and that agent are not a good fit. So what has happened now is, as a buyer, you do have more options. So if you can choose to hire a full service agent. You can choose to use an agent in a limited capacity. Maybe you've bought several homes before and you know your way around and you're comfortable doing some of the heavy lifting yourselves, and you want to negotiate a fee with an agent to possibly handle inspections for you, make sure the contract is correct, review the comparables, help you with closing documents, things along those lines. You can hire an agent to do just that. You could also choose to represent yourself. You could choose not to have any agent. You could choose to do all of it your own and or with the use of an attorney. Or you could contact the listing agent directly. Now, I will tell you, or I will advise you, in my opinion, that is not your best option. And I'm not saying that to try and say an agent should be involved. That's not what I'm saying here at all. You need to do what's best for you. But the rules and the laws in they vary from state to state. And when you have a situation where you're contacting the listing agent directly, I want you to keep in mind that the listing agent works for the seller. Right? So again, I'm not going to speak for other agents or other people, but I'm going to tell you from my perspective. This is the way I work. If I'm the listing agent on a home and you're an unrepresented buyer and you want to see that home, I will meet you at the house when I can and I will show you that home. I will unlock it, I will make the appointment, I will get you in, and you are more than welcome to look around. If you decide it's the absolute perfect home and you want to make an offer, you have a couple of choices. Again, you can hire a real estate attorney, you can hire an agent of your own at that time, or you could ask me to write the offer for you, or any listing agent for that matter. But keep in mind that agent, I'm going to speak for myself here, right? I represent the seller. And since I represent the seller, I cannot represent you. It would be a purely transactional relationship between you and I. What does that mean? It means I can't advise you on the price that you should offer. I can't advise you what you should do in terms of inspections. I can't advise you with regards to questions on certain disclosures or title forms or things like that. I can't offer you any advice or guidance because that would be a conflict of interest. My job is to protect the interests of the seller. So hopefully that makes sense. Could you potentially save some money that way? Possibly, absolutely. But that's a decision that you need to make on your own. So how do I recommend you go about it? If you wanted to see a property, I recommend that if you're thinking that you might want to use an agent, that you go ahead and sign a short-term representation agreement specific to one house, one day, one weekend, something along those lines. Get to know each other. Go on a date, in essence. See if you like each other. See if you think you could be someone that you work with. And during that time frame, you can ask a few more questions about how that agent works. What's going to be involved? What type of services do they offer? From there, it's always possible that you then schedule a second meeting. And in that second meeting, you would go over it almost like a listing agent gives a presentation to a seller and goes through everything. It would be the same thing. You would meet with that agent and go through everything in how they work and negotiate the fee that the agent is going to make. It's completely negotiable between you and that agent. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit with regards to what changed on the buy side. So all of that being said, in practical terms, what is actually happening? Are sellers still covering the buyer agent commission? And I will tell you, at least in this market, the answer is yes. For the most part, they most definitely are. Now, it's just done different. It is not against the rules or the law per se that agents can't email agents or send flyers out or put riders on signs with a specific offer of compensation. The brokerage I work with doesn't believe in that. They don't believe that's the intent of the law. So I usually have this discussion with a seller, explain what their options are, and then just say, depending upon the offer, would you be willing to contribute towards buyer agent compensation or commission? And the overwhelming answer has always been yes, in which case the only field in our local MLS that talks about this is one that says seller concessions, and it is simply a yes or a no. If we put yes, you can know that the seller is willing to consider compensation. And what I tell agents when they call me is whatever a percentage or amount you have agreed upon with your buyer, go ahead and include that in your offer, and it will be negotiated just like all of the other terms of the offer. But overwhelmingly, I am still seeing the sellers contributing and covering that fee. For the simple reason is that we are in a much more competitive market these days. I can see if this was the market like what we had in 2021, then no, sellers were not going to cover that fee. They didn't have to. That's when multiple offers and overbidding were taking place and things like that. Now, in this market, that's not the case. It's much more balanced. It's much more normal. So sellers are motivated to sell, and they know that things are taking longer to sell. So they are more inclined to offer buyers concessions, whether that be towards closing costs or whether that be towards the buyer's agent commission. In either way. Also, if the buyer is submitting a strong offer overall, and it's a very reasonable offer, most sellers are still willing to contribute. I will tell you, if we look at the Pacific Northwest, so I know Washington, they haven't offered buyer agent compensation or a commission percentage in the MLS for a long time. And I don't know the exact percentage, but it's still, over the past few years, it's like 98 or 99% of all the transactions, the seller is still covering the fee. So again, hopefully that helps. Now, what does this mean going forward? What should you expect? Well, I don't think any of this is a bad thing. It's just made the conversation much more transparent, right? And it's going to force agents to prove their value. For years and years and years, let's face it, the idea behind it was, well, for a real estate agent, they don't really do anything and then they get paid this huge fee. And the people that make that statement are usually people that haven't been a real estate agent and actually done it. And I know I could get flack for that, and that's fine. But it's not quite as simple or as easy as people make it out to be. However, what this does is there's nothing hidden. Everything's on top of the table. What the fees are presented up front. They're clear. Everybody knows about them, both buyer and seller. So adding the transparency into it is a good thing overall. I also suggest for buyers and sellers that, before you're ready, you start interviewing agents early. Understand exactly what it is that they're going to be doing for you, and you can make the decision then on whether or not you are going to utilize the services of an agent. I mean, let's face it, when selling your home, for years, you've had the option to put a sign in your yard and have it for sale by owner. There's been nothing restricting you from doing that. It's the same thing now for a buyer. You can buy on your own. You don't need an agent. If you find a for sale by owner, you guys can go put it together. If you find an agent, or if you find a home that's listed you really like, call the listing agent, ask them to show you the home, and then you can work the way through it yourself. You can use a limited service agent. You can use an attorney. So again, it's just creating transparency and bringing options into the marketplace. So hopefully this has helped explain and clear up some of the confusion that exists out there. I realize that you probably still have questions, in which case please don't hesitate to reach out. You can always call or text the number that is up on your screen, or if you'd like to discuss things further, I offer everyone a free 30-minute consultation. You can go ahead and scan this QR code right here, and that is going to take you directly to my calendar. Pick a time that works for you, and I'd be more than happy to answer your questions and discuss your buying or selling plans in much more detail. So again, thank you for spending a few minutes with me today. I hope that this has helped provide some clarity on all of the changes that has taken place. And make sure you don't go anywhere, because I know you're going to enjoy this video coming up next.